Since football season's come back around, I'd figure it'd be a good time to talk about UIL academic eligibility standards, and yeah, also the Flyin Hawaiian.
And a third fumble from senior Charlie Macon, who was named Arlen Scholar Athlete of the Year. He's all yours, Princeton.
Hey folks, welcome to Squirrel Tactics. Like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, let's do this. Peggy makes the big leagues, and I just want to say something right up front here. Y'all know how the writers like to do the whole Hank is the only sane person surrounded by crazies trope? You know, the one that worked well early in the series, like with Halloween?
Hank, no! You could go to jail!
I knew the risks when I put on the uniform.
But eventually that levee ran dry, and we ended up with stuff like Miss Wakefield.
Hank had to call Johnny Law on Big Bad Old Lady with Walker.
Caleb.
I want my bike back.
Well, you're gonna have to ask nicer than that, Caleb.
Oh, yeah?
And Bad News Bill.
Dang it, Bill. I need to talk to you about Coach Bradford. He's raising Bobby's expectations, and that's the wrong direction for that boy's expectations to go.
Yeah, that trope. This episode is basically that, except it's Peggy instead of Hank, and even Hank is against Peggy here. We start the episode off in the Hill Kitchen, where Peggy gets a phone call from the high school offering her a substitute position.
Guess who is subbing for high school geometry teacher Tammy Charbonneau while she takes an 8-week doctor-ordered bed rest maternity leave? Me, Peggy Hill.
That was going to be my guess exactly.
And this is a big deal for Peggy because to her, this is getting called up to the big leagues. Hence the title name. Going from middle school to high school for her is a huge step. And more importantly, it validates to Peggy how good she is at her job. That she got to move up plus to take on such a long job. And I know I can't be the only one that's a little iffy on her teaching geometry for that long, considering Spanish is her specialty and she ain't too good at that.
This is the major leagues, Hank. The bigs. The show.
So Peggy heads up to the high school and meets the high school Spanish teacher, Miriam Caney, voiced by Natalie Cannerday, who Peggy is more or less in awe of.
17 years teaching high school Espanol, you have never once gotten sick, or if you have gotten sick, you have never called in sick.
And it makes sense that Peggy had never subbed at the high school before if the high school Spanish teacher had never called in sick. She's kind of like the high school version of Peggy, except she's full-time and competent as far as her personality goes. The two of them even wear similar styled glasses. Meanwhile, at the Legion of at Preston Rogers Waffle Cafe, an obvious stand-in for the Waffle House, and more specifically the Castilian Room, we're introduced to footage of Arlen fullback David Kalaikialii, also known as the Flyin Hawaiian, during a meeting of the Arlen High Booster Club.
He says aloha to the end zone and aloha to the Temple Tigers. It means both hello and goodbye.
Yeah, apparently he's the best rusher Arlen has seen since Ricky Suggs the previous season.
Ricky Suggs!
Also, I'd just like to point out that the Booster Club apparently commandeered the hostess podium from the front of the restaurant for their speaker. Their first order of business is the programs, more specifically the funding of the programs, with one and only one business not holding up their end of the bargain.
Every business owner here has taken out ad space in this week's program except Dale Gribble.
Yeah, we all knew it'd be Dale's dead bug.
Dale's dead bug. Dale kills him. D-E-A-D. Dead.
Though, to be fair, is Dale's dead bug even an actual business? It never seems like he makes any money from it. It might as well be listed as a non-profit. Probably make more money that way, but I do love Dale's reaction and faux anger at his imaginary secretary.
My secretary messed up again? She is so fired.
Peggy is teaching class. Well, she's telling terrible jokes that none of the students like because it's a terrible joke. She'd be better off talking about how the shovel is the most groundbreaking invention in history. But whatever, we're introduced to David Kalaikialii himself, voiced by the highly underrated Brendan Fraser. He shows up to class a little bit late, 28 minutes to be exact, and he's not big on class participation when he does decide to show up. Something that does not exactly impress Peggy, and she calls on him first to turn in his homework.
I didn't do it. I'll take a C or a B or whatever. You know, I am not going to tell you how to do your job.
Now, I can only speak from personal experience, but from that personal experience, star player or not, this was not how he would have been acting in class. Not back then, at least. This is the type of behavior that if the head coach found out about it, the player would be doing belly flops until he puked. At least a good head coach would. Anywho, Peggy gets invited to join other teachers at lunch, where she asks them about David, finding out that he's the star fullback. He runs a 4.5 which is running the 40-yard dash at 4.5 seconds for those unaware, which is a good time. The current average for high school running backs is a 4.49, but keep in mind that he's also a fullback, not a running back. So he's probably used more to run it up the middle. Peggy asks about David's grades because he's doing fine in every other class except geometry, and one of the other teachers fills her in on what's going on.
Peggy, David is our star fullback. He doesn't have a lot of time to study, so we cut him some slack.
Again, based solely off of personal experience, teachers having to cover for student athletes is a last resort type of thing. How a good head coach would handle this is to get a hold of David's schedule before the school year started and strategically place other players who were stronger academically in those same classes. Fun fact, that's how I ended up taking psychology in high school. One of our running backs was taking it, so I got put in there. In fact, you'll notice another player is sitting directly in front of David in Peggy's class. So he's probably there to more or less tutor David, and it seems like that just ain't working because David just doesn't care. The teachers explain that David has scouts watching his game and he needs to focus on that. Then when one of the teachers refers to David as unteachable, Peggy, she takes that as a challenge.
Unteachable?
I spent 6 weeks in health trying to get him to brush up and down. He's like a wall.
She tells her family what happened over dinner, which is totally ignored because they're more interested in the fact that she met David than anything else. And it seems Luann may be a tad bit enamored with the guy.
He's the Flyin' Hawaiian! If I were 2 years younger.
Well, first, he is your age.
Yeah, except they're not the same age. We learned in a beer can named Desire the previous season that Luann was 19 and a half.
Let's just say it is your beer. How old are you?
19 and a half.
Exactly. If you tried to claim your prize, you'd be incarcerated for underage drinking.
And considering that took place the previous football season, Luann would be about 20 and a half. She was pretty proud of that half, so I figured I'd add it, making it impossible for David to be the same age. Seeing as under UIL rules, if you turn 19 before September 1st, you are ineligible to play. Therefore, this being the first 6 weeks period of the school year, the absolute oldest he could possibly be and still be eligible would be to just be turning 19, making him at least a year and a half younger than Luann. No, they're not the same age, and no, I'm not going to drop this mic because it was way too expensive. Anywho, we learned from Hank that David plays Iron Man football, which is odd to have your star player playing defense, returning kicks. Yeah, I get that, that's totally normal, but not defense.
He plays offense, defense, and returns punts.
Well, it looks like Luann isn't the only one with a crush on David.
Peggy decides that she's going to treat David like any other student and have a talk with him about his grades. So she keeps him back after class and informs him that he has a 0 in the class. And keep in mind that Peggy took over this class, so the previous teacher had him failing as well. But David doesn't seem that worried about the situation.
You have no homework points and no participation points.
Peggy offers to tutor David after school, except he has football practice after school, so she proposes that they meet after practice so that they can go over geometry, which David kind of agrees to, I guess. I think he was just more trying to get out of that conversation.
How about geometry practice after that, with a playbook by Coach Peggy Hill?
Okay.
That night, she put together a geometry playbook for David, and her plan was to wait for David after practice and spend time going over the material and proving that David was not, in fact, unteachable.
Yoo-hoo! David! David! David!
Except, yeah, that didn't work, because of course it didn't work. Did she not notice the 3 cheerleaders that were also waiting for David? And it should not come off as a shock to anyone that when faced with the decision of either going off with 3 cheerleaders or studying geometry, yeah, Pythagoras can bugger off. Though props to Peggy for her speed and gumption here.
David, you forgot your notes.
You know, you run fast.
But when they get to the next test, which Peggy refers to as a midterm, problem with that is that it doesn't make sense because midterms are at the end of the semester. She probably meant it to mean the same as a 6 weeks test. Typically in Texas schools, the year is divided up into 6 6-week periods. And since it's football season, it must be the end of the first 6 weeks.
David, I just want to say that it has been a pleasure educating you. I think I have learned just as much from you as you have from me.
Yeah, that's awkward. Either way, Peggy is not thrilled with David's results. Let's be honest here, that playbook is still probably in the backseat of his car unless it got thrown out to make room. And we find out what those results are pretty quick because the boosters ain't happy about them and they aim to take it out on Hank.
She flunked David. Now he's out for 3 weeks academic suspension. Do you know what happens in those 3 weeks? San Marcos, Belton, McMainaberry, Hank!
Okay, so no pass, no play. Under UIL guidelines, if an athlete fails to get a grade of 70 or higher in a class after the end of one of the 6-week periods, they then become ineligible to play for at least 3 weeks. They can still practice, but they can't play. And it's only 3 weeks if they have a 70 or above in all classes on their 3-week progress report. So he can come back in 3 weeks if he's back to passing. Hank tries to defend Peggy, but yeah, the guys ain't hearing it.
Now hold on. I'm sure it was just an accident.
No, Hank. This is an accident.
Man, and Hank had just gotten that set up too.
An 1/8 inch back to the right. No, an 1/8.
He waits for Peggy in the garage, and as soon as she gets home, Hank gets right to what he wants to talk to her about.
How could you flunk the Flyin Hawaiian? Haven't you ever heard of no pass, no play?
Hank demands that Peggy change David's grade so that he could play since they have tough opponents coming up on the schedule. But Peggy argues that she should be treated just like anybody else, and if he didn't do passing work, then he shouldn't get passing grades.
We're going up against San Marcos, Belton, and McMainaberry. We need him to go to state.
And yeah, Peggy's right. Peggy's 1000% correct here. And Hank should never have asked her to change the grade. It pains me to say that, nothing a little Cabot cheese can't take care of, but Peggy is right, and she's right to stick to her guns. It's like that Captain America speech about planting yourself like a tree next to the river of truth and telling the world, no, you move. Her treatment by the other teachers isn't much better. Her idol, Miriam Caney, even changed her glasses to be different from Peggy. And Peggy's surprised that they wouldn't take her side, seeing as they're educators who were supposed to be looking out for what's best for the students academically. But no, they're not on board in any shape, form, or fashion.
You want to change the world? Go back to middle school. It's too late here.
The Booster Club meets up again, and I should probably go ahead and point out that several members are voiced by guest stars. Big B is voiced by sportscaster James Brown.
McMainaberry, Hank!
Perel is voiced by former NFL player turned sportscaster Howie Long.
Hey, look, I got Billy breathing down my neck as it is. I don't need another punk in there making me look bad.
And the president of the Booster Club, Mr. Preston Rogers himself, was voiced by former NFL player turned sportscaster Terry Bradshaw, whose character, by the way, is not happy about the loss Arlen just took and is somewhat trying to be optimistic about the future.
And we'll probably squeak by next week cause Belton's still reeling from the drug bust, and then it's McMainaberry, and there's not a single addict on that mother-loving team.
They all know that Peggy isn't going to give David any leeway, and David isn't going to study in order to pass himself. So they try to figure out a way to get him away from Peggy and under someone who will give him some leeway, which Buck is more than willing to volunteer for, especially since he expects Hank to actually handle it.
I volunteer Strickland Propane to jump through this little loophole. Now David can work for me till the swallows get back from Capistrami.
And Hank certainly has his work cut out for him since he's at least somewhat taking it seriously, but it's rather clear pretty quick that he's getting nowhere with David and probably isn't going to be getting anywhere with David anytime soon.
And the vaporization rate of a 100-pound propane cylinder at 70 degrees Fahrenheit is how many BTUs per hour?
Can I have a chair?
Peggy isn't too happy that Hank and his waffle boys, as she calls them, found a workaround to get her out of the picture and basically cheat David back onto the football team, with Hank trying to defend their position and get her to understand what exactly is at stake here.
But you win state and, well, that goes up on the water tower.
Uh-huh.
I love this little moment, by the way. The look on Hank's face when Peggy says uh-huh shows that he knows what that uh-huh really means. He lies about David doing well, which greatly affects Peggy, causing her to question whether she really was good enough to teach high school, even though she seemed to be doing just fine. Again, keep her away from Spanish and she's a pretty good teacher. Hank gives David his test, which is a single essay question, open serviceman's manual, and all he has to do is answer the question of what he likes most about propane. That's a slam dunk. Why the hell would you even need the manual for it? But we all know it didn't go down particularly well, and even with something as simple as that test, David still should have failed, though Hank finds the fortitude to pass him anyway, even though this is what it took David nearly 2 hours to come up with.
Strickland propane does not have a vending machine. It smells, and I thank God every day I get home that I didn't get exploded.
I absolutely love the fact that Hank has to take a shot of beer from a plastic shot glass he keeps in his desk before giving David's paper an A. I just wonder if that's something he normally keeps in the drawer there due to, having to deal with Buck, or he just had it on hand in case he needed it from dealing with David. Also, that beer's probably pretty warm and probably tasted terrible. Peggy is still depressed at her perceived failure, refusing to drink from her world's best teacher mug, and it doesn't help when Hank comes in and informs her of David making an A on his propane test. And it really doesn't help when she finds out that her grade was thrown out. Plus, just to add more insult to injury, Hank uses the world's best teacher mug. I get he didn't think about it, but the symbolism here is pretty clear.
The principal kind of threw out your F, so right now he's on honor roll.
Bill, Dale, and Boomhauer, however, are rather happy with Hank, like so happy they sing a song for him, which is rare outside of the Alamo beer song.
It's time for a beer.
What could be more apropos? Alamo, Alamo, my one true amigo.
And they even grab him a beer rather than make him reach for his own, all because he looked the other way and did the wrong thing by allowing someone to pass that should never have passed. And yeah, Hank realizes it.
For Hank's the jolly good fellow, for Hank's the jolly good fellow, for Hank's the jolly good fellow.
And after seeing Peggy try to put in her notice at the school, claiming to have a form of single-digit carpal tunnel she refers to as chalk finger, Hank finally admits that he was wrong. David didn't deserve the grade he was given, and he was only given that A because it meant they had a chance of getting to the state championship. And I do love Peggy's reaction here. She's somehow simultaneously speechless and yet not.
Hank Hill, I am speechless. I literally have nothing to say. Not one word. Nada. Zilch. Zero. I don't know what you're waiting for.
Hank decides he wants to come clean about his unfair grading practices to the Booster Club, but he arrives to a hero's welcome, though the reception for Peggy is a tad bit less, let's say welcoming. I mean, we're talking X-Pac heat here.
Get this beautiful human being some waffles.
Hank tells them all that he gave David a grade he didn't deserve, to which everyone cheers. Then Hank goes on to defend Peggy, claiming that she's been right all along and that he was going to change the grade he gave David and fail him because he deserved to fail. This isn't quite as popular, and Buck steps in pretty quick to overrule Hank and keep David's grade as is.
Sir, did you read that essay?
It's a classic. I thank God every day I didn't get exploded. Get to you.
Peggy steps forward and tells them that she's going to be contacting David's mother as well as the school board. And the Waffle King here tries to buy her off with a whipped cream waffle. But yeah, Peggy doesn't take that deal, and I don't blame her.
We don't want to go dragging the boy's mother into this. I'm sure we can work something out.
Instead, she and Hank visit Miss Kala'ikeali'i, who we've seen before back in Traffic Jam when she handled Hank's car insurance claim.
Did you have anything to drink this morning, Mr. Hill?
No.
Did you use a mouthwash or cough syrup?
No.
Did you eat an unusual amount of sausage?
Look, am I covered or not?
And she explains to them that David is learning disabled, that he studies all night after football practice, but he still can't understand his classwork, and he puts in a lot of effort, all while showing off his room, which looks like a small child's room.
Sports is all God gave David, and it's the only way he'll get to college.
Peggy accepts this and they leave, at which point we find out that the whole thing was a setup as the boosters come out from hiding and they all celebrate getting one over on the hills so that David can keep playing.
And the Oscar goes to me! Come on out, fellas.
We smoked them good, bought it hook, line, and sinker.
But when David walks in wanting to know why there's all this kid stuff in his room and why his adult magazines have been moved, and it's explained to him that they had to tell the Hills that David was, as Buck put it, a slowpoke, so that they wouldn't turn him in for failing. David does not like the idea of people thinking he's stupid, but they try to convince him why it's okay.
I'll tell you what's stupid, me giving you that Trans Am if you ain't gonna drive us to state.
David's still not on board, so he goes to talk with Peggy, telling her that he isn't learning disabled, that his mom and the booster club set the whole thing up to get them to back off and let David play, but he understood why she would think he was learning disabled.
The pep rally is down the hallway, honey. Wait, did you poop yourself?
I deserve that.
And yeah, he actually shows a lot of either growth or just hidden maturity to see the error of his way so quickly. And he makes the decision that Peggy was right and he shouldn't be playing.
If I don't pass, then I should no play.
Now, I partially agree with his reasoning for why he should focus more on academics. Yes, you absolutely want to have something to fall back on if the whole professional football player thing doesn't pan out. Though I do think he's a tad bit optimistic about his chances, which, to be fair, he sounds like at least half of the high school football players out there.
I probably should have something to fall back on anyway. I mean, the odds of me not making pro are what, 50-50?
No. The actual percentage of high school football players that make it to the NFL is 0.023%, a rather small number, and I highly doubt based on his build that he would be kept running the ball. He's a fullback, but a lot of teams even at that point were moving away from using fullbacks. So my guess is that he'd be moved in college to either linebacker or the defensive line. They said earlier that he plays defense as well as offense, so that's probably going to come into play there. Most people would be surprised how many really good, highly sought after high school running backs end up as college linebackers or defensive backs. Anywho, David wants her to teach him geometry before the game, but Peggy tells him there's too much geometry to teach him in such a short time. However, she takes him to Hank over at Strickland so that Hank can teach him about propane, which doesn't go that well at first, but we get to see Peggy be a good teacher as she figures out a way to teach David so that he understands. Peggy has never had an issue with teaching. She's a good teacher. Honestly, she's a really good teacher. Peggy's issue has always been with learning, but David learns quite a bit about propane before heading off in the car Buck Strickland gave him, all while a proud Hank and Peggy watch on.
I'm gonna be smoking on that field, but not near a propane tank, because propane is flammable.
And the episode ends with David rejoining his team on the field as they take on McMainerberry, with Hank and Peggy watching from the stands, proud that David had stepped up and made the right decision. So, should Peggy have grounded the Flyin Hawaiian? Absolutely. David was a student athlete. Notice that the student part comes first, because in the long run, most likely, he's going to have to rely on his brain rather than his football skills. Though I do hope they bring him back in some capacity for the revival. Maybe as a former pro that owns a car dealership, or hell, he could be Arlen High's new head coach. They could even use him as an example of what happens with a lot of former players in that they're stuck in the past, considering those years or year as the big man on campus is often the highlight of their lives. You know, the whole Uncle Rico thing. And an interesting aspect I see with David is, I guess, the fickleness of the Arlen boosters and fan base, seeing as after this episode we never hear anything about David ever again. He's completely dropped like a bad habit. It's the exact same fate that occurred with Ricky Suggs. He was good enough to tie the Arlen High career touchdown record, but gets completely forgotten about afterwards. Ricky didn't win them state after all, so to hell with that failure. And he's replaced in the hearts and minds of the fan base by the Flyin Hawaiian. Also, was David the backup to Ricky Suggs? We know from his mother already appearing that they already lived in Arlen. So unless he played for West Arlen before transferring over, he must have been Ricky's backup. And speaking of old Miss Miss Kalaiki Ali'i, looking at it from her perspective, I don't really disagree with what she did here. She did what she saw as the only way to get her son back on that field, which she also saw was his best chance for his best possible future. Was it shady? Yeah, but parents will do shady things for their kids, and sometimes maybe parents should do shady things for their kids. As far as the boosters are concerned, yeah, they were wrong. Not so much for what they did, but more for the fact that they don't give two flicks of a fiddler's dick about David. They don't. He's simply a tool to achieve a goal, that goal being a state title. And I'm willing to bet that Buck took that car back after they didn't win state. And we know they didn't win state because it would have been mentioned. Hell, it'd be up on the water tower. Is the Arlen Booster Club an accurate depiction of an actual high school booster club? In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. But I think it's a fair depiction. And there are plenty of boosters out there willing to skirt the rules just like these. Overall, I think it was a pretty good episode where we see Peggy actually be 100% correct. Hank be wrong and have to admit he was wrong after coming to his senses, and in the end, everybody ended up happy. Plus, we all got a great way to remember the chemical formula for propane.
C, 3, H, 8, propane, propane, hike!
Hold on. Sure, a week ago I would have been booing my wife right along with you guys.
You were, Hank.
Yeah.